Greetings and welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant, and you are watching Homeless Calculus 101. Before I begin, a quick anecdote. I just went into one of the gas stations where I occasionally go in, well, frequently, go in and just chat with the people who work there because they're very nice. They're nice to me, they're respectful to me, and I like them personally. So I go in and I chat with them, just shoot the stuff, and they were bumming when I went in. And the reason is because someone had just driven off with more than $30 worth of gas. And I asked them to tell me about it. And they said, well, the person pulled in, the cameras only show from the front. They had taken their front license plate off. They pulled in right in the center, right in front of the cash register basically, filled their tank with gas, and then they backed out recklessly into the road, which is a 90-degree turn downhill where you can't see what's coming up behind. In other words, they put everyone on the road at risk and then took off. So I asked them what did they look like. And they said, well, they had a pretty nice Dodge Daytona. Just looked like your ordinary average college kid, you know, well dressed, normal looking, maybe high school suburbanite. Just nothing unusual about it. And I said, did they look like they were homeless? And they're like, no, just look like your ordinary suburbanite. More than $30 worth of gas they stole. I'll come back to that. What I'm going to talk about in this video is just one example of what I have to do to try to manage what some people might want to call money. I don't. It's actually the story of how to lose everything you've worked your life for by attrition. Again, this is just one example. Remember, I have had to go to pawn shops about 1 to 3 times every week for the last 2 years, except when I worked at the truck wash. And even then, I had to sell things when we had the 5-week shutdown with no advance notice and no pay, that kind of thing. Mr. H never paid us on time. So even then I had to go to pawn shops, but not as regularly. The thousands of items I had when I became homeless are gone. And I've lost them one at a time or in groups. And you're going to see a group. This is the last stuff I had to sell. I'm going to show them to you. Remember, I had a lot of musical instrument gear because I wanted to open up a music store, and I bought a lot of guitars. A lot of my cash was caught up in guitars because I was taking them apart. I was learning how they work, how to fix them, repair them, modify them, customize them. Out of all those guitars, there was a handful that I wanted to keep for myself. These were going to be my guitars, my favorites of them all. Obviously, those are the last ones I sold. 2 of them you're going to see here that I just lost last night. The first one here is my Agile Les Paul. I took the picture at the pawn shop, so it doesn't have very good lighting, and it's a shame because this thing was gorgeous. That beautiful blue finish, and I had put on the abalone knobs and things, done some modifications to make it look more consistent in terms of the metal and the abalone. I paid about $350 for that guitar, plus another $80 for the case. The pawn shop gave me $125 for it. Next up is my Michael Kelly Les Paul guitar. You can see how gorgeous this thing is. When I had it at the pawn shop, everyone who walked by stopped in their tracks with their mouth open and just stared and said, that is the most gorgeous guitar I've ever seen. Customers and employees. And they're right. I paid about $350 for that one, plus another $80 for the case. The pawn shop gave me $100 for it. By the way, pawn shops, when you sell a guitar, if you include the case, they don't pay you anything extra for it. They just ignore it. Of course, when they go and sell it, they advertise the fact that the guitar comes with a case, so they can sell it for more. Next up is a Delta Lab effects pedal. This is a pedal that you plug your guitar into and it creates all those neat tones and sounds and special effects, distortions and things. This was not an expensive one to begin with. You know, I've lost effects that cost, $400. This one cost me $100 when I bought it. The pawn shop gave me $15 for it. The reason I kept it for last is because it's kind of rare and it has a really unique quality to it. I really like this thing even though it was cheap. Next up is the Danelectro wah pedal. Those are the pedals that you step on when you're playing guitar and it goes wow, 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 wow. I bought this used. It's the only wah pedal I've ever liked. I paid $50 for it used. The pawn shop gave me $15 for it. Lastly, there's the Fender amp. This is from the 1980s. You can see it has this hideous carpet AstroTurf on it. That's the sign of the times as it was back then when this was made. It has a fantastic, beautiful tone. Probably the best tone you'll find in a solid state amp. I had the head version of this, which is the big, huge thing that you put on those gigantic speakers when you're playing in a large arena. I lost that quite a while ago. The thing is, with this one, I did not like that carpet, so I spent about 2 weeks and a fair amount of money ripping off that carpet, which wasn't easy because the carpet was glued into all the parts of the amp itself. So to not damage the amp, it was very difficult. It took me about 2 weeks. I sanded everything down by hand, used no power tools, put a tremendous amount of love and care into every square inch of that thing. Fixed the dents, and then I stained it and refinished it. So when I took it to the pawn shop, this is what it looked like. I paid about $125 for that amp, and then I put in maybe another $30 to $50 when I was refinishing it. The pawn shop gave me $70 for it. For all 5 of these items, if you include tax and shipping for the ones that I bought online, it came out to about $1,200 that I spent on these. The pawn shop gave me $325. The $1,200 that I spent on these represents, and it's hard to estimate, if I spent all my disposable income for the most part, I would estimate it took me 3 to 4 months of work at that corporate job where I worked 2 to 8 hours of overtime unpaid every day because I was on salary and I had to do the jobs of people who were too lazy to do their jobs. And I received about 80 to 120 emails every day, and I made it a point to answer every single one of them every day. Unlike all of these Minnesota government people who have never once responded to any of my emails, including when I filed official notarized complaints about being denied my right to vote because I'm homeless. Look at my other videos. You tell me where anybody's responded. The only one from this government who's responded to me is Julie Rosen, who wrote back, "No thank you." That's your Minnesota legislators for you. That Minnesota legislator clown who wrote back and asked me what my home address was so he could send his response to my email about being homeless. And the third response I've gotten from the government here is when I wrote to the medical examiner to ask them how I could, when I die of exposure or starvation, I can make sure certain people are notified. Those are the only responses I've ever received from Minnesota government. Attorney General Lori Swanson, Governor Dayton, all the way down to the bottom. No response. The way I earned that $1,200 to pay for this was working a job where I got no extra pay to stay an extra 2 to 8 hours pretty much every day. As I said, out of 600 people in this place, I was almost always the last person to leave. I worked on holidays. I worked on at least one vacation day. All told, it probably took closer to 6 months to earn the money I spent on all those things. I'm putting down 6 to 8 months because, you want to earn that much extra so it's in the bank to make up for it. But either way, it took many months to work hard to earn the money for those things. $1,200. The pawn shop gave me $325 in one day. Now the question is, where did that money go? That work that I spent anywhere from like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months for all of this stuff, when it came back to me as cash from the pawn shop, what did it do for me? This is where the homeless calculus comes in, because I had to make a decision. What do I do with it? Now, the 3 bills I have every month that I have to pay are 2 storage bills and my car insurance. Car insurance is required by law if I'm operating a motor vehicle, which is what I'm sitting in, which is what I live in. The first storage is in California. I've paid on that for the last 10 years. Almost as soon as I moved out here, the price of gasoline skyrocketed, and I had a conversion van. I got this job where I worked so hard all the time. In all those years, I was never able to get out of there, to go back to California and get this stuff out. Between the cost of gasoline, never getting a break from work, between all those things, I couldn't do it. Plus, I always thought I was going to go back. I got stranded in Minnesota. In that storage in California are all my family mementos, everything. And don't forget, both of my parents passed away within the same year while I was working so hard for this company. So everything I have to remember them by is in California, and I haven't seen it in 10 years. Also, almost as soon as I left, Public Storage bought this storage facility in California, and ever since then, every year they have raised it $10. So when I left, I was paying $80 a month. Now I'm paying $160 a month. And there's nothing I can do about it because they know I'm stranded out here and they keep raising the price and I can't do anything about it except pay it. The storage here in Minnesota has everything I've accumulated since I moved to Minnesota. And over 10 years, you accumulate life experiences and you have stuff and documentation that become mementos of your life throughout that period. So even if you take away all of the physical stuff, guitars and furniture and things like that, there's still an awful lot of things that represent my life over the last 10 years. Plus, that storage has everything in it that I've had to sell and lose by attrition just to survive while living in this car. So I couldn't let that go. So those are the 3 bills. 2 storages, car insurance, but then I also have to pay for gas, which is $10 to $30 every single day in the wintertime. To run this thing is a 2,000-pound heater. I also need food. Alright, so $325 just for one trip to the pawn shop. What do I do with it? It's the end of the month. What do I do with it? Here's option number 1. I could pay for my California storage and retain all my personal mementos, but I could lose my Minnesota storage and everything I've accumulated over the last 10 years, including personal mementos, and up until now, the only things I had to sell, which are what allowed me to survive day by day. Of course, that's all gone now, but up until now, I had stuff to sell. That's how I've been surviving in this car. So I could pay for the California storage, but I could lose everything in Minnesota storage and pay my car insurance. And then, with the cash that's left over, I could pay for 4 days worth of gasoline and no food, or 3 days worth of gasoline and 2 days of food, or 2 days of gasoline and 4 days of food, or 1 day of gasoline and 6 days of food. And remember, gasoline means heat, which means survival, because it's sub-zero. It's Arctic winter in Minnesota. Another option is I could lose everything in California storage. Everything I paid $13,000 to retain there. Every memento I have of my childhood, of my family, of everything. All the original manuscripts for the books that I wrote and the research to back up those books. My book collection from the 1800s. All that stuff I could let go, but then I could pay my Minnesota storage and pay car insurance, and I could juggle about 7 or 8 days worth of gas and food out of the remaining cash. That's my second option. And it would probably end up being, in my experience, if I think it's going to be 7 days, it's going to end up being 5. It's just the way it is. The third option is I could pay for both storages. I could keep everything in California. I could keep everything here in Minnesota storage and pay my car insurance. And then I have a choice. I can either have 1 day of gasoline or 2 days of food and no gasoline. Whichever option I choose, once those few days are finished, when the food and the gas is gone, I have to go back to the pawn shop and sell something else. The problem is, I have nothing left to sell. This is it. I want you to notice something. None of these options include me not paying for car insurance. You know why? Because I'm required by law to carry insurance when operating a motor vehicle. Yes, believe it or not, this homeless person obeys the law. Can you believe it? There's an awful lot of people out there driving around with no car insurance. Do they live in homes? It's called being responsible. Unlike this suburban kid who just stole $30 in gasoline right in front of everyone's eyes and will never once be held accountable for it, I sell this stuff to pay for my gasoline because I'm not going to steal it. Who's the lazy bum? The homeless person living in this car or the people out there? I've asked that question over and over in these videos. There are two other options that are of course not feasible, but I want to throw them at you. I could lose both storages and not pay my car insurance, not have food, not have gasoline, but with that $325, I could hold it in my hand as 1/2 of what I would need to fix the catalytic converter in this car. I couldn't fix the catalytic converter because that's only half of what I need, but I could do that. Another option is I could let both storages go. I could not pay my car insurance. I could not have gas, not have food, and I could hold it in my hand as 1/3 to 1/4 of what it's going to take to fix the blown head gasket and get a valve job. Which obviously I can't afford either. And where did the blown head gasket valve job come from? Where did the plugged up catalytic converter come from? It came from running this car 24 hours a day throughout the winter because I don't have a home. From day one, I have been saying all I wanted was a job and some way to maintain hygiene so I can maintain that job. The state of Minnesota has failed to provide anything that resembles facilities for hygiene for homeless people. They build a football stadium, but they can't build a shower. It is effectively against the law for me to get a job in the state of Minnesota. I have to commit a felony in order to do it. Even if the job application itself does not say, I certify all information is true and correct under penalty of perjury, a felony, and I can't put an address in there because I don't have a permanent address. So I have to commit a felony if I put any address in there. Even if that wasn't an issue, taxes. I have to fill out the tax forms when you get a job, and the state taxes are going to say, under penalty of perjury, a felony, I certify all information is true and correct. The state of Minnesota has been the biggest roadblock to me getting a job. If I had been allowed to get a job from day one without breaking the law, because I'm honest, not these people, me. If I had been allowed to get a job and I had had facilities for hygiene so I could maintain that job, I would have lost none of these thousands of items that I've lost over the last 2 years. I would have been able to fix all these car problems and in fact prevent these huge ones because I wouldn't have been running the car all the time. Why? Because I would have saved up enough money to get a place to live, all without touching government assistance. All I needed all along, all I asked for all along was a job. And instead, I've had to lose everything I've worked my whole life for. And now I'm about to lose my life. Why? Because I'm honest. Because I pay for my gasoline, even if it means selling the things that are this near and dear to me. Every day, effectively, losing something else. Loss after 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 loss for 2 years straight. Because I pay for my food, I pay for my gas. I don't want government handouts. I want a job and I want to pay my own way. It's kids like this who live in a nice warm house who steal gasoline. Not me. I want to point out, I've said before I contacted 100 Minnesota churches and they didn't even bother to respond. Now, the truth is, in the end, I've contacted probably closer to 120 or 30 churches, and someone who saw my YouTube videos contacted 10 additional churches on my behalf. Received 0 responses from any of them. Not one response. They could care less. And yes, I'm writing to the leadership of those churches, if you can call that leadership. Hopefully I'll be able to put out a video talking about that. There's 2 things I wrote to these churches about. One of them was the one time I set up a GoFundMe account to help me out, referred churches to that. They didn't respond. Nobody was even going to the pages. No one even looked at it. The other thing I did with a lot of these churches, a whole bunch of these churches, was offer a creative solution. And in fact, this is the first thing I did before the GoFundMe. The creative solution was simply this. You have a large congregation. I'm writing to several churches. Between all of you, you represent thousands of people. All I'm asking for is for you to mobilize. Watch my video called The Donner Party to learn the significance of mobilization. I ask these leaders to mobilize their congregations. There are people in there who have enough resources where they could help me out. Not by giving me money. I didn't want anybody to give me money. I've never wanted people to give me money. What I said was, I have all this music gear sitting in storage, and I can either lose it by attrition one at a time until I'm out of it and then I just die, or if you can help me out, if you care enough, find some people who will each buy a guitar from me at say the price that a pawn shop would have given me. Because that way when I buy it back from them, I don't have to lose twice as much in finance charges. And all I have to do is store a guitar for a while. If you could get enough people to do that, like 20 people out of these thousands of congregants represented here, I could have enough cash on hand at one time to go out and get a place to live. Once I have a place to live, it's easy to get a job, multiple jobs for that matter, and then I can work my way out of it and buy those things back from these people. And if, for any reason whatsoever, I cannot buy these back or those people need money, they are free to sell the instrument that they temporarily bought from me, and they will always make a profit because they're buying it at half price in the first place. They could go on Craigslist. If they give me $100 for it, they could put it on Craigslist for $200 and sell it fairly easily and make a profit. And I would not hold anyone accountable if they did that. If all of them did that, I wouldn't hold them accountable. To me, that was a pretty creative solution. It didn't require anyone to give me money. It was more like, I guess you can call it a loan in a way, but I'm giving them collateral that's worth far more than what they're giving me. Everybody would win in this. Everybody would win. But not one church responded. 0 mobilization. I wrote to leadership that represents thousands of congregants in Minnesota. They could have easily saved my life 2 years ago when I first started asking churches for this kind of help. And instead, they did nothing. They didn't even respond. They ignored me. They left me out to die. And over those 2 years, I have lost everything one day at a time until now it's gone. And now I'm gonna die out here. This kid who lives presumably in a nice warm home just stole $30, more than $30 in gas. Look at what I've gone through to make sure that every day I can put $10 to $30 in gas in this car to keep it, just to use it as a heater. Look at the effort I've gone through. Look at the loss I have suffered to make sure that I do that without breaking the law, without stealing from anybody. And yet people look at me, the homeless guy, as the problem. Not that kid, not that little suburban kid out there who went through the effort of taking his license plate off to make sure he got away with his theft. And incidentally, as I talk to these gas station attendants that I talk to so often, the police do nothing about drive-offs. Nothing. But if there's homeless people out there, they go into a store and they're starving to death and they stick a granola bar in their pocket, they are in handcuffs, they're in jail. It's called shoplifting. The police heavily enforce shoplifting. But if you drive off with gas, even though it has all those horrifying warnings about, you're going to be exiled to the moon and $2 million fines and all this, lose your driver's license, the police don't even enforce drive-offs. Maybe that's why this kid thinks he can get away with it. You know why? Because he can. Maybe if some people who were earning a paycheck actually did their jobs and enforced certain laws, you wouldn't have those kinds of drive-offs. Kind of like the police did not enforce the law where my neighbors were terrorizing me, which is what sent me into homelessness in the first place. Hopefully you see the pattern here. This has been Homeless Calculus 101. Thanks for watching.